Nice.
Nice.
Um,
I have a question,
yeah,
Paul.
go for it, Amy.
Um, so this sake for tonight, I haven't warmed up yet. I'm just letting it get to room temperature and trying it.
Perfect.
Um, does it, so it has like a velvetyness, like a textural quality to me that's
Yeah.
unusual. Is that going to increase as it gets warmer? Like a milky, not milky, but like I don't know the right adjective. I'm
Milky is
terrible.
100% the right word.
Okay.
Yeah, totally. Totally. It is creamy. Yeah, for sure. For
And
sure.
that increases the warmer it gets with this one particularly?
Um, I don't know. Did anyone else want to comment there?
I
I'm
mean, I
only
would
like a
say that
quarter way in, so
I would say
I
that
feel
it
like it
does
got
to a
creamier when it
point.
started cooling down.
Oh, go ahead, Chrissy.
Sorry. I was saying I feel like it got creamier when it started cooling back down from being warmed up rather than getting more creamier when it was warmer.
Yeah, I'd say there's like a nice like the recommendation is like between 70 and 120. Like that 70 to 90-ish will keep that like as it heats up that sort of milkiness. Anything above that, I think it lets off too much. And I
okay.
noticed that in when it got to that warm, I like David Graham, I didn't have a water bath set up and I wanted to try it multiple times. So like I poured it out and put it in the microwave for like 10 seconds and then another 10 seconds and like tried it at a couple of different temperatures. But I noticed as it warmed up, it lost some of that mouth feel that you're talking about.
That's what I'm getting. I starting from like mine was like I started at 45, but now it's like 72 about. And that's what I noticed. I was just curious because I like it now and I don't want to warm it up. Is what I'm asking.
Just stop and drink it. Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's my experience is that things will taste kind of thinner when they're really cold. And then when they get really hot, you start to kind of unlock the alcohol, if you will, and they tend to taste a little bit thinner to me. But an interesting point, Chrissy, is when it comes back down to temperature. So now you're actually creating a third style, right? So something that's heated and brought back down to room temperature is going to taste different than something that just stayed at room temperature because you're affecting it as you do that, which is another style. That's why one of the reasons why I recommend sort of heating up only a little bit of it, because when it comes back down, it's usually not my favorite. It's usually kind of you want to hit it when you get the temperature you want, then drink it.
A quick recommendation. I have a ceramic studio, and so
Cool.
I think a lot about vessels. For these cup sakis, like I typically like mine cold, but if you're going to heat it up, one nice way to heat it up is to get a small ceramic vessel, fill it with boiling water, let it
Yeah.
sit there for a minute or two, then put your sake into it, either room temperature or cold, and let it heat up that way. That way you don't have to heat up the full cup. You don't have to stick it in the microwave. It doesn't take very long.
Love it.
The other sort of way to do this without boiling water and waiting for that is to just put some water in a cup, then stick it in the microwave. Don't put a cup into the microwave by itself. It will crack over time. But if you put a little bit of water into a cup, stick it in the microwave for like 10 to 20 seconds or something so the water gets very hot. Pour the water out, dry it, pour a little bit of sake in, let it get warm. That tends to work quite well.
Yeah. In fact,
Um,
sometimes when I'm at bars or restaurants and I want to show people what this would taste like hot, I'll do that. I'll just have them pour hot water into a glass and then rinse it out, and then we'll fill the sake in. Are these one of yours, Laura? That's fun. Thank you.
I mean, I have also a recommendation. If you have if you have babies, you have the bottle warmer, just don't give it away. Just keep it. It's amazing. It's just heat up to the right temperature in like less than 2 minutes.
Nice.
So if you can wait for baby bottles to warm up, you can wait for your sake to warm up.
Perfect. And then you get it through TSA too, right?
Yeah.
I just don't drink it fast enough for it to stay warm by the time I'm done.
Yeah. Fair
I don't
enough.
want to sip it.
Fair enough. Amy made the comment that it was creamy and almost milky. And that is exactly right, because this one is done in a style that actually is using a lactic fermentation. So there's 3 fermentations, and that first one is a lactic fermentation. And so it absolutely does have a creamy note to it. And so when you think about pairing with a sake like that has creaminess, I usually think about either two ways. You could either lean into the creamy and pair it with things that are creamy, creamed kale or cheeses or things like that. Or you would want to pair it with something that you would normally put something creamy with. So maybe you do it with some charcuterie or something, or meatballs or something that you would put a cream sauce on top of. Or broccoli is always nice with cream sauce. And so you do those together, and the sake sort of becomes the sauce. And one of the unique things about sake is that you can do what's called mouth mixing. You can have the piece of food and you can have the sake in your mouth at the same time, and chew them together, and it kind of becomes a seasoning for the sakes, which is a unique way to go about it. Because normally with wines and things like that, or beers, we eat a piece of food and then we swallow it, and then we go after the drink, and we're kind of trying to pair the aftertaste of the two things. Whereas with sake, we really want them to do the mind meld, and really create that umami milkshake. Cool.
You're talking about flavor. Could I ask a question about the tasting wheel? Because I'm also pretty new to like
Yeah.
tasting wheels for sake. Because I
Yeah.
get that dairy kind of lactic, and I get some of the other like mushroomy kind of flavors, but there's this thing happening in my mouth, and I don't know if it's the finish, I would call it, but like it's kind of like a little peppery in the back of my tongue. So I don't know if that's spice, is that finish, is that like, how do people talk about that? Maybe there's not a wrong way, but like, are there a better way to do that? Oop, I'm looking at
Yeah.
the thing, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, and I'm interested in anyone else's thoughts as well, but that spiciness could come from a couple of different things. It could come from the alcohol, right? So that simply could be that. But oftentimes too, it may come from the type of rice that they're using. So they may have a rice that isn't necessarily super premium, really, really clean rice. And so you're getting a little bit of that kind of maybe bitterness probably isn't the right word, but you're getting a little bit of that sort of spiciness. But I often get that with sakes. I'll get a white pepper note. I think that's a pretty common note.
Yep.
Oh, I particularly get that with omachi. That's like my characteristic for that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Very common with some of the heirloom rices. I'll show some pictures in a minute with like a grain of rice, but with some of the heirloom rices, they don't have this pure starch in the center. They have just kind of more distributed starch and protein. And so when you polish them, even if you polish them to ginjo levels, you're still going to be fermenting some proteins and lipids and things. And so you're getting a little bit of that sort of funkiness to it. Yeah. I don't remember the rice on this one, but I'm 100% certain they're not using Yamada Nishiki. So, oh yeah, Dewa Kirarai, which is, got to be some crazy,
Local Yamagata rice, I think.
Yeah.
When I visited them, they say they have like 100 plus Yamagata rice they can choose from. And I think this is one of them.
Yeah, I've never seen a sake with this rice before. I mean, it's just very specific. And it's a very unique climate there because they're sort of in this plain at the base of a mountain. So they have very specific rices. They have rices that are specific for ginjo, rice that's specific for daiginjo, for junmai. It's pretty interesting. Cool. Other questions?
Unrelated question to today's sake, but I noticed when I was looking through the book that there was a day that doesn't have a sake. It's like a little special thing. For something like that in the future.
Don't spoil us. Surprise!
Sorry. Would you ever be consider using something like, or just including anything about sake kasu in anything in the future?
I would love to. I love sake kasu. So kasu is what you get when you press the sake. You have the leftover sort of spent rice grains. And I love it. It's really wonderful to cure fish or pickles or things like that in it. It's really great for cosmetic uses.
If you ever get sake kasu that is like from a daiginjo or ginjo, it's just packed of that ginjoka. It's like super perfumey, and it's really great for like making like gindara, like the miso black cod. That's probably my favorite use of kazu.
So I have considered importing it, but I don't have enough like demand yet. But I've considered importing it for restaurant use, and I've considered importing it for cosmetic use, but not yet. I'm still in year one here of importing sake. Cool. Other questions? So as I say, I did put together a little presentation thingy, which I'll be happy to walk through if you all don't have any other questions. I wasn't looking at the chat. Do we have any things in the chat?
I have one question. It might
Yeah.
be sort of like too specific and we don't have to answer if we don't want to, but I noticed like all of the like sake things are like below ground or like under the surface. Is that typical for sake production in Japan? I'm thinking about for space and things too. Does that like temperature then impact, it must impact like the production of sake? Like, yeah, because when I saw that first videos and those pictures, I was like, oh, this is kind of like soy or other like fermented things that
Yeah.
they do like in these vats that are in the ground. So I don't know if that's typical. Is that typical if sake is produced here? Like, I don't know. Like that was curious to me. It doesn't have to be something we have to talk about, but I was just curious.
I will show you some pictures that'll make it a little bit more clear, but
Okay.
rarely are they actually in the ground.
Okay.
They're normally on the second floor.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay. That was that because I kept thinking about temperature, especially like in like
Yeah.
mountainous or cold or like, you know, those elevations. I was like, okay, that makes more sense to me.
Yeah,
Thank-
and temperature is very important.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons why I love cold, and I forget who said it, but they love cold region sakes. And it's like I totally agree. And one of the reasons that cold region sakes are great is that the cold is stressful for the yeast. The yeast works really hard when it's cold. It's trying to ferment, and that lets it produce really interesting flavors. And when it's cold, that also traps those flavors in the sake. If it were hotter, the fermentation would happen faster and it wouldn't develop as much of those interesting fruity flavors. And then there would also, some of them would blow off. And so, you know, when we talk about sake breweries in the US, I think that's one big difference, is that many of them are not brewing super, super cold like they are in Japan. They're trying to get some product out there so they can make some money. And so that's one sort of quality difference I've noticed between Japanese sakes and American sakes. Nice. Cool. Was there any questions that anybody asked that I missed? Please yell at me if I didn't. Cool. Okay, I'm gonna jump in to a little presentation. Let me see if I can pull this up here. Yeah. We got that going while I get this to going. Where do I share? Oh, here we go. Nice. Okay, good. We can all see screen. Excellent. My daughter helped the graphics here, so it's got the nice graphics on there. She's 12. Cool. So sake production is old. We're talking 3rd century BC. Typically a sacred type of thing for many, many years. Most sake prior to about 100, 200 years ago was very cloudy. And the first sakes were made not with koji to convert the starches to sugars, but actually chewed and then spit out, and the enzymes in your mouth would convert the starches to sugars. And that's a tradition that came when koji came over from China. Koji used for making soy sauce and other fermented types of things. That really revolutionized sake. So koji is the mold that converts starches to sugars. We'll talk a lot more about that in a moment. So during the Edo period, breweries started to employ filtration. All sake is filtered by law. Sometimes there are particles left over after fermentation or after filtration, or they've added that back in, and those are all ways that you can make sake cloudy. They can further clarify it using ash or charcoal or carbon to make it really shelf stable. If it's not done, then they're called maroka, and those tend to be more full flavored. They might have some yellowish coloring to them. That's not because it's old, it's just because it hasn't been filtered. Great. And then the really big invention here that really sort of modernized sake is in 1933 when we get a rice milling machine, and I'll show you some pictures of that in a moment. So sake is alcoholic, always has to be. It's less than 22% ABV. If it's over that, then it's considered shochu, even if it's not distilled, or it's considered just harder alcohol. Cool. 4 ingredients: water, rice, koji yeast, and sometimes alcohol, which we'll talk about in a minute. So the water is pretty important, especially to me. Breweries are almost always located near an abundant source of water. So you can bring in your rice, you can bring in rice from all over, but it's really hard to be trucking water around Japan. So mostly you're going to be near a source of water. It's mostly soft when you compare it to the rest of the world. Japan's got a lot of snowmelt, but there are some harder waters that tend to be near the ocean, or maybe they have some well water that's a little bit harder, tends to be higher in calcium and magnesium, things like that. In the south, there tends to be some harder waters. For example, in the Nara region of Hyogo, high in phosphorus and potassium, low in iron, which is good. You don't want a lot of iron in sake, but those phosphorus and potassium feed the fermentation. So they're kind of like nutrients for the fermentation. And when you have high mineral content, then you're going to typically have a dry sake. So one of my breweries at the bottom there, Iwase, which makes the Iwanoi brand that we saw back here. That's the Iwanoi brand. That one has got super hard water, 240 parts per million, calcium and magnesium, and the sake becomes very dry because of that. And they even ferment very cold to try to offset the hardness of the water, and their sake still turn out really dry. So water is an important feature that, again, is really different than wine, where you can easily pick out the difference between Merlot and Chardonnay, right? But in sake, there's 8 to 10 different levers. The type of water they're using, the temperature they're fermenting at, the type of rice, the polishing ratio of the rice, how they develop the acidity, all sorts of different ways that can affect the flavors. So those are all active brewing decisions. And I like to think of them kind of like pottery, because in wine, grapes, if you just let them sit in a picking bin, they might make wine. Or at least the wineries will tell you in their romantic vision that that's all they did. They just made it in the vineyard and then they just dumped it in a bin and it made itself into wine. But with sake, if you just have a pile of rice, it does not make sake. Kind of like if you have a pile of clay, it does not make pottery. It requires the skill and craftsmanship of a potter, and the same thing is true of sake. It's a craft product. So the rice is going to be short grain Japanese rice, wetland cultivation, rice paddies. The kernels tend to be larger than table rice. They tend to be porous and fragile with a high water absorption rate. One of the things that Davey had mentioned was that sometimes people are using a stopwatch to measure how much absorbing the water is absorbing into rice. That's because it could happen very quickly. The starchy center is called the Shimpaku. I'll show you a picture of that in a moment. But there's over 100 different varieties in Japan. Some of them are just very small production, very, very local, very regional. So here's a picture of a rice paddy field. Notice on the, these aren't perfectly straight because a lot of them are hand planted or with a machine that isn't necessarily doing them perfectly. Whereas a lot of rice in the US, for example, is spread by plane or by giant machine. And so you're just going to get a different, different type of product there. Most common, Yamada Nishiki. Hyogo Prefecture is known for having like the best Yamada Nishiki, though I would say that's a little bit of old news, and there's a lot of new and interesting rices that are being used more often. Goyakumen Goku is the second most common rice. It's typical of Niigata Prefecture, but of many others. It tends to give you a sort of cotton-like texture. It is not my favorite rice. It tends to be cheaper and tends to produce kind of a light and sort of a, I think about it as a blank canvas for the brewer to push in other directions. Michael had mentioned earlier omachi. That's an heirloom rice, or an heirloom rice that's not been crossbred. It's super rich and earthy and steely, and sometimes I get sort of like blueberry notes from it. Excuse me. So a wonderful sake. And then there's a lot of other sort of geeky rices out there. Ayama is one of them. I have a couple of different sake using Ayama rice, and I just wanted to throw that one out there. Cool. So here's what I was talking about with the rice. So here's a brown rice. And some of the sakes that I have are 90% polish. So they're just barely polished. You're still working kind of with a brown rice. But when you put it in this vertical milling machine we see on the right-hand side, then you start to remove some of that bran and the proteins and lipids that are on the outside. When you get down to 70%, you can see the white starch in the center, but you still have some of that lighter color on the outside. So we haven't purely done all the protein on the outside. Same at 60%. So today's 65%, right? So 65%, somewhere in between these two, you're still going to get some of that graininess. And add that to the fact that you're not using a super premium sake rice. You're using like a local rice that probably is even more indistinguishable between the shimpaku, the centerpiece, and the outside. But when you get down to 35 or 40%, really anything past 50, you're getting to a pure starch. So there's some kind of modern ways that people are trying to do this polishing. One of them is a flat polishing, where they're not trying to tumble it, but they're trying to sort of follow the curvature of the rice. And that tends to be a little bit more efficient. The other big movement in sake right now is to just not do as much polishing. And that's going to give you more flavor. It's going to be more sort of environmentally friendly because we've got less waste, using less energy. But it could mean that you get some crazy fermentations because you're adding more proteins and minerals and things into the fermentation. So those are fun. Afuri is one brand that's doing a lot of that. Tsuchida is another brand that's doing a lot of that. So worth looking out for. So here's the koji. Some of you saw some pictures in Takeda with doing this. These are mold spores. Most sake breweries buy these mold spores. It is a yellow koji, typically, that they are spreading over warm steamed rice. And that process over the next couple of days in a 100-degree cedar-lined room is going to start converting starches to sugars. And then we can use the yeast to convert sugar to alcohol. So it's a really, really unique process. We can't do a malting process because we polish those rices, right? So malting, like in beer or whiskey, you would just heat up the grains with some water and they start to germinate and then convert starches to sugars. But we can't do that here. And of course, in wine, there's sugars just naturally. But in sake, uniquely, we need this starch to sugar conversion. Black and white koji are sometimes used in sakes. I bring in some that are using both of those. Later this month, you will get to try a white koji sake. So that's exciting, but don't spoil any surprises yet. Here's some more pictures. You can see these sort of mold grains up here in the upper left-hand corner. And down here on the bottom right is kind of like what we're looking for at the end. This is really fuzzy looking. It almost looks like styrofoam. And if you taste it, it's going to taste really, really sweet. There's a really famous brewer that no longer has any teeth because he would always taste the koji as the way to measure if it's at the right place. So once we do that with some of it, then we can start building our fermentation. If we did all the rice with koji, then we might get a stuck fermentation because we'd have too much sugar, be kind of like a honey and just be shelf stable. So we're gonna do some of it, and then we're gonna add some rice and add some water and some yeast, and then we'll make sake. So the yeast is what makes the alcohol. It also produces carbon dioxide. So sometimes, not with these cups, maybe, actually, definitely with December 24th, you'll get a little bit of carbon dioxide in that one because it was a namazake when I went to the brewery and I said, I love this. I want to put it in my calendar. And they said, well, okay, how much do you want? I said, I'll buy 600 of them. And I said, okay, great. Pasteurize it for me. And they did. So that is a really special sake that no one else has and only people that got the calendar. So there's a bunch of different yeasts in Japan. They're sort of numbered, yeast 7, yeast 9, that sort of thing. There are a handful of them that are pretty common, but there's lots of proprietary ones. Some are even using ambient yeast, but a lot less ambient yeast than you would get in wine or in beer or something like that. Yeast is really what's going to produce the aroma of sakes. So sake is unique because of the parallel fermentation. We've got koji converting starches to sugars. At the same time, we've got yeast converting sugar to alcohol. And we typically will add things in a couple of different additions, 3 different additions. Then we'll press it and filter it and then pasteurize it. So I'll walk through a little bit of that in this flow chart. So we're going to mill the rice. We're going to wash it to get some of that stuff that we milled off. We're going to steam it or steep it, soak it and then steam it. Cool it down, and we'll take some of the steamed rice and make koji. We'll take some of that koji rice and do a starter, which is where we're going to add the yeast. And then we're going to build over the course of 3 days or more our fermentation tank. Then we press it, and we can bottle it right off of pressing if we want to, or we can filter it. Then we can pasteurize it if we want to or not. Then we can mature it or not. And then we can pasteurize it again or not. And then we can blend or dilute it. And then we can bottle it. And then we can pasteurize it again or not. So lots of decisions. Here's again that sort of 3 days where day 1, we're going to start our fermentation. Day 2, we're going to rest. Day 3, we're going to add another sort of 25%, get up to about half of the tank. And then day 4, we might add the rest of the tank. This is just a general idea. There's lots of breweries that may do this in 5 or 6 or 7 days or 8 days or 8 additions, depending on the yeast or what they're trying to do. The sake that you had yesterday has an extra addition where they add amazake, which is koji and rice, or rice that's been converted by koji. And so it sweetens the sake, and then they add brewer's alcohol and then press it. And so the brewer's alcohol dries it out, the amazake sweetens it up, and then that produces a balanced sake. Here are some folks soaking rice. And again, we're doing this before we steam the rice so that we can get an even steaming to the rice. And it doesn't just steam the outside of the kernel, it actually steams the whole thing. So you'll also notice lots of hygienic ware here. We're really, really concerned about hygiene and getting any sort of bad bacteria in there. Here's a rice steaming tank. You can see that we've got sort of a cloth over the top of it with a rope tied tightly around it. And then there's a steaming sort of mechanism in the bottom that's going to steam the water to push through the rice. So the sake that we had today, and Amy so brilliantly pointed out that this was lactic. Well, why does it taste lactic? It tastes lactic because it is a kimoto, meaning living starter. So they take the rice and the koji, they add them into a tank with water, and then they mix these up. So they're typically going to use lactic acid spores, and they're going to develop lactic acid in the tank as part of the process. And that's developing this, this acidity naturally. And that's why you're going to notice bigger acidity on that sake, as well as more complex acidity. Then we're going to add that. So this number 4 here goes over to number 5. We're going to add that to our tank, and then we're going to brew sake. Whereas Sokujo, which is the modern method developed in 1909, that is using just an add of lactic acid. So they're not developing it in the process. They're actually doing it as an add. Tomorrow, spoil surprise, you are having a Yamahai. So Yamahai is, instead of this cold lactic fermentation process, they realized also in 1909 that they could just add acid, or they could just heat up the tank to kick off a warm lactic fermentation. And they didn't have to do this pole ramming business. So Yamahai is the Yamahai Oroshi, or the end of this pole ramming business. Here is Daiseki Brewery, and they're doing their signature mashing of the tank. Here's me at Tsuchida Brewery. I'm making a sake in a tank called a Kyoke. This is a neutral wooden barrel that starts the fermentation process. So Kimoto tend to be creamy. As they age, you might get more custard or hard cheese notes, which is kind of fun. They tend to be higher acid, more complex acidity, more umami. You really want to have them with salty foods. And Kimoto, I think, perform great at room temperature. They are sometimes really great at cold too. There's a movement to make a lot of Junmai Daiginjo, or super high premium competition style sake, with Kimoto, because they're looking to add as much flavor as possible. So they use a really highly polished rice, really aromatic yeast, and then a really complex acid production. So with Yamahai, also 1909 here, they're replacing this pole mashing with warmer temperatures. And you can see that this brewery, this is Iwase Shuzo in Chiba, they just put a like a heating lamp underneath the tank to just warm it up. And that extra heat, to me, gives Yamahai more nuts and mushroom and grain, sometimes tobacco or leather flavors. So I want you to look for that tomorrow in your sake. Yamahai, I always want to try warm. I think oftentimes Yamahai are going to perform better warm or at room temperature than cold. Sometimes people will try Yamahai at cold and they'll say, I don't get it. Like, what's going on here? And it's because Yamahai tend not to be fruity. They tend not to be ginjo. And so when they try them at cold, they've suppressed the savory aromas and they don't have much fruity. So you're just not getting much. But if you try them warm or hot, or with hot foods, you can put some hot broth in your mouth and put some sake in your mouth and mix them together. then you're going to get a lot more flavor out of it. When we press the sakes, the first pressing is known as the arabashiri. It tends to be bold and a little bit spicy. The heart of the pressing is in the center. That's the nakadori or nakagumi. And then the last bit is the seme. Sometimes the seme is blended in, or sometimes it's reserved for cheaper sakes. This is a yabuta, which is a pressing machine. And it's kind of a word, I forget the terminology, but it's kind of like Q-tip, where the brand Yabuta is synonymous with pressing. So this is a giant hydraulic accordion. And after pressing, this is the kasu that somebody was mentioning earlier. I think Chrissy was. Look at how dry it is. It's coming off in sheets. Really, really unique. This is a picture I took at Kikawa Jozo. Afuri is the brand that we import, as well as Kikuyu. And it's really, really fascinating to be able to see inside that. It's pretty rare, unless you go to a brewery, would you be able to see inside one of these machines. Here's another smaller machine. This one is similar to one that my friend Todd up in New England has a brewery, Farthest Star, and he has one kind of like that one. Other ways to press: fune, literally a ship. This is a wooden box. I don't know if you, I'm looking on the left-hand side here. This is a wooden box, and then there's an inset lid that goes over the top of it. There's a crossbeam here holding it up. But you pack it, and this is a picture on the right-hand side. You're going to pack it with these bags of sake, and then you're going to very slowly press it with an inset lid. So lower yield, but you're going to get less efficiency, and that means less astringency. Sakes with pressed via fune tend to be more expensive because you've got less yield, but they tend to be really fun and really lively. A lot of times they're going to not pasteurize them, or only pasteurize them once because they want to preserve that fun. You could also drip the sake, just hang it by gravity drip it. That's typically reserved for a competition style sake because it's really low yield and it only is dripping out the sort of most aromatic, and you're going to get no bitterness whatsoever. Typically very expensive sakes. You can also like put it in a centrifuge and other crazy stuff too, but this is the most common premium way to do it. So we'll skip that one. I mentioned that the December 24th sake has been pasteurized. This is this one on the right here. This is literally the machine that it was pasteurized in. You put the sake in crates and you run it through the machine. It's got a really hot water bath and then a cold shower because you just want to heat it up enough. If you boil it or cook it too hard, you'll destroy the flavors. And I did what's called namachozo, where I actually pasteurized it in bottle, single pasteurized it in bottle instead of pasteurized it in tank and then bottled it. So that's why you might still have some effervescence in the sake. We'll see. Haven't tried it yet. I only tried the Nama version. So you've probably seen these types of charts. I believe in the next 10 or 20 years, we're going to move away from all these classifications because there are really great Junmai sake that have 90% polish ratios out there, and they're super premium, and I pay more for them than I would a Daiginjo or a Ginjo. So you can take away from these types of things what you want. If you want to learn more about that, you can Google it. Cool. You have seen on the sheets on the right-hand side, I put on these things, right? On the right-hand side, I put the SMV, which is a sake meter value. That is a rough approximation of what the sake is relative to the weight of water. So if it's negative, it's going to be heavier than water. If it's positive, it's going to be lighter than water. Cup sakes tend to be on the dry side because they tend to be Hanjozo or alcohol added styles. But they also tend to be just kind of like easy drinking, on the train type of thing. So it's really just impossible to tell the difference between -2 and -5 or +2 and +5 because alcohol is lighter than water. Acid is going to change your perception of the sweetness. So something that's high acid and high alcohol might taste, high acid, low alcohol might taste very dry, but it isn't necessarily. Something that's very high alcohol, but also is sweet, might have a plus number, but it might taste sweet. So it's not a perfect measurement, but it's a data point. And then I threw some other terminology down there as well. Keep your sake refrigerated or in a cool place. Here's a wonderful shop that has got most of their bottles wrapped in UV filtering plastic, and also behind doors. It's refrigerated, it's vertical. I give them 5 stars. Typically, especially if you're refrigerating sakes, you can drink them within a year. You can go longer, but it's not necessarily going to help. I would not do any sort of like weird pumping of them or anything like that. You're just going to remove aromas. Just seal the cap back up, put it back in the fridge after you open it. I would drink them within a week or 2 if it's unpasteurized or namazake, 3 weeks or more if it's pasteurized. But something like a Yamahai, like tomorrow's, you could probably leave it open on your table a whole day and it'll be fine tomorrow. Here's some data on sake. Particularly what I want to talk about is get into a little bit of the pairings and to notice the free sulfites or the free SO2 and the tartaric acid. These things tend to interfere with flavors and interfere with flavors with food. So you'll notice sake is very high in nitrogen and glutamic acids. Those make it great with foods. And you'll notice the pH tends to be higher than beer and wine, less acidity. And so that's going to make it easier to pair with foods. The iron and sulfur dioxide in white wines tend to interfere with seafoods. So with seafood, always sake, especially shellfish, one of my favorite pairings. Talking a little bit more about pairings, sweetness and umami in the food is going to increase the perception of bitterness, acidity, and alcohol in the sake. And this is not like dramatic, but I want you to notice it. So if you're having a sake, try it with a little bit of sugar in your mouth and see how that changes the sake. Interesting, right? Acidity and salt, and a salt again is like #1 friend of sake. That's going to increase the body, the sweetness, the fruitiness, and decrease some of the bitterness and acidity. So if you have one and it tastes too thin to you, try it with salt or try it with acid. The easiest way to have something with acid is to have your sake with salad, because typically we're going to have salads that are acidic, or pickles or things like that. Those are wonderful things to pair sake with, especially if you're drinking a table sake like we did yesterday that can taste a little bit thin sometimes. We might want to increase the body of it. And so salt and acidity are going to do that for us. Bitter foods like kale might increase the bitterness in the sake. And by bitter, I don't want that to be a negative term. I think bitterness can be a complex term. And so that can help. I would also say that chili heat is difficult for sakes because the alcohol is high. It's higher than wines. Typically, it's higher than beers. Chili heat opens up your pores, and then the acid or the alcohol goes right into them. So I don't recommend spicy foods with sake. I would just drink some cheap beer. You all have been doing a great job of playing with temperature. I want you to play with foods too, with lots of different things. Bring to your tastings some salty things, some pickled things, some sweet things. Try them all out. See what's different about them. I would avoid over swirling. You're just sort of throwing flavors out. Do the aeration in your mouth. Your sakes are going to be better for it. For fruitier style sakes, I tend to like a straight walled glass, the cup being just fine. For a Junmai or a Kimoto or a Yamahai, something like today's or day 2, the pure grain, I like a wider bowl for that. So there, a piece of pottery is a really wonderful thing to do, because you're going to get a little bit more of the savory aromas from a wider glass. And this is really important here at the bottom. Open 3 or 4 sakes at once. Don't open one and drink it all that day. Open 3 or 4, drink a little bit of each of them, put them back in the fridge, try them again tomorrow or the next day, see how they change, see how they're different with tacos than with pizza. Cool. Did I stop sharing? I did. Okay, cool. Excellent. Good. I was not following the chat while chatting. Questions? Hey, Paula, go ahead.
Oh no, that wasn't me. I was just giving you claps. But there was a good question about
Amy
why
has a good
it's
question
further up.
in the chat. At 9:52, Amy's question was good.
Oh, I can just say it out loud. It's
Go for
totally
it,
fine. When you were talking about, it was on one of your slides, the Kimoto versus the Sukojo.
Yeah, Sokujo.
All right, cool. I understand the difference, but what is your personal opinion on those? One obviously is taken away from the labor and the detail to the space, which understanding wine, I get it, but that doesn't mean it's not going to be an equally great product that's coming out. What is your just personal opinion on that?
Yeah, so that's great. We'll talk a bit about it. So Kimoto sakes tend to be more complex, right? As we talked about, if you're really trying to win the competitions, you would likely do something like a Kimoto, or you might use a unique yeast or a unique koji, like a black koji or something like that, in order to really increase the acidity or the flavors. Kimoto is hard. I've had 2 breweries, their first attempt at Kimoto, and it wasn't very good. So it's difficult to do. There's a higher chance of spoilage. I mean, you're creating a lactic fermentation that could go bad. You're introducing, lactic bacilli on top to try to kick off that fermentation, but there could be all sorts of other things in the brewery or whatever that could affect it. So it's high risk. It is labor intensive, and it takes expertise, right? So for those reasons, there's a lot of breweries that don't do it. There's many breweries that sort of specialize in it. One of them that we're going to have later, Kariho, is a brewery that and they do almost exclusively Kimoto. So we'll get to try one of those later. We've got a couple of different Kimoto in the box because I love it. It's probably my favorite style of sake. I love the complexity. I think they're very interesting, and I love the spectrum. If I want Junmai Daiginjo, I would typically choose a Kimoto if they had it. If I'm at a fancy sake bar and they say, what do you want? I would say, I want Kimoto Junmai Daiginjo. But if I'm like just having some sake while I'm cooking at home, I'd probably reach for a Kimoto that's much less polished, an 80, 90%, something like that. So I love the style. Sokujo, Kimoto makes up maybe only like 5 or 6% of all sakes. So very low amount of production. it's more of the things that get exported because you typically are going to export more premium products than in Japan. Yamahai is pretty low production as well. I may even have those reversed. I think there's more Yamahai than there is Kimoto, but that's changing. I think there's more people doing Kimoto these days. But 90+% is Sokojo. You pick up a sake off the shelf, it's going to be Sokojo because it's so much easier to control. You can dial exactly the acidity you want. You're not going to get sort of variation from batch to batch of the acidity or the type of acids that might show up in it. It's going to be really, really much more predictable and consistent. Yeah. Nice. David Graham, I said 3 to 4 at once. You don't need to finish all of them. I don't want you to finish all of them. I want you to leave them open or closed, but in your fridge, and then you can try them with different foods, right? I mean, that's the fun of sake, is the experimentation. Michael said that really well the other day. That's the beauty of sake, is to be able to try different things at different temperatures with different foods to see how they change.
Yeah, Paul, also like how it changes over time
Yeah.
is another part of that. Like I've had sake that have like peaked 3 weeks in, right? That was when like I enjoyed them. I've also had sake where I had it 3 weeks in and I was like, well, I should have finished this on the first day, right? So, but the experimenting with it is at least for me, that's the fun part.
Yeah, definitely. Michael does a good job of that. He's always got a bunch of things open. And I think it's really good to do that experimentation. And then, if you start to see a sake going downhill, it's probably not going to come back. So drink up, right? If it's not heading the right direction. Yeah. Chrissy, I like your comment about the bitterness. Yeah, I totally agree. That's one of the reasons why I have really moved away from wine. The bitterness and the acid just don't typically agree with me. Somebody had a question?
Oh, why cedar during when the koji's added? Why is it in a cedar room?
Yeah, so the cedar is naturally going to be I forget the word, but it's not going to have stuff growing on it. So they want a room that's going to be really clean, and so that's why they're using the cedar. Yeah, antibiotic, I guess. Maybe is that the right word? Something like that.
More antibacterial than.
Yes. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. All right. Adrian, I really like what you did. You tried a couple of days side by side. I think that's really fun. Please don't feel like you have to drink every day. That's okay. You can open the sake, open the calendar, and then you can put it in the fridge or wherever you want, and come back to it, or invite some friends over on Saturday and try 6 sakes together or whatever you like. I do have some extra books too. So if you want another book, send me an email, and I can mail you out another book as well if you want to. You and your partner want to have different tasting notes or whatever. Happy to do that as well. Yes, Laura, thank you for the note about the work. It's like a 3-month process putting all these together. So I wrote all the tasting notes for all of these. I visited many of these breweries. The food pairings, some of them are from me, some of them are from the breweries themselves, some of them are from some of the other importers that I worked with. So some of them are, I edited them out, like some of the weird Japanese pairings that you're probably just not going to do at home. But they're fun. Yeah. Good. Joe, yes, I will share the presentation. I'm recording it. I will. I'll send you a link to that. Let me think about how to.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. I'll figure out how to share that out with folks. The Facebook group, if nothing else. If you haven't joined that Facebook group, there's a link to that one on page 1. Nice. Excellent. Oh, I wanted to see the poll. What was our favorite December 1st? Yes. Great. Wonderful. Well, we get to go virtually to the brewery next week, so that'll be really, really fun. There's a just like you got on today, there's a link on that day. And if you want to, the next day is also from the same brewery. So you could open the next days. I will give you permission. Next Tuesday, you can open Wednesdays. And so then you can have 2 sake from the brewery with the brewery. So I have a really great relationship with that brewery. Obviously, we've made a custom label together, which is cool. But both the 12th and 13th generation have come to visit me in Portland. And we've gone to Seattle together and San Francisco together to do some sales trips. And they are making really wonderful sake. So when my friend Lucas tried that Black Skull sake, he said, "This is amazing. I have to find out how they do this." And so he, through a couple of different sources, actually found himself at the brewery and worked at the brewery for 2 weeks. So he's going to join us as well and talk about his experience at the brewery brewing that sake for next year. So actually got to brew the Black Skull for me, which is pretty neat. Nice.
Speaking of breweries,
Yeah.
now that Desai has a New York brewery, is that going to make it easier for you to source stuff from them for the calendar?
It's not my favorite brewery, to be quite honest. Yeah.
That's
I
fair.
would be interested to see. I haven't tasted the New York Desai.
I will say that it certainly got something to it. Like the flavor wasn't quite to my liking, but it wasn't boring. It definitely had some complexity to it.
Yeah,
I really like their Nigori.
Oh, sorry, Chris, go ahead.
So I really like their Nigori, and also I tried it's a more expensive bottle, but I just tried their 23 Daiginjo, and I
Nice.
really liked that one.
Nice. Cool. There's some and Mark can yell at me if he wants, but I think that there's some hurdles with American sake. And one of the big ones is the rice. And if you're using American grown rice, then it's hard, even if you're using Yamada Nishiki or some premium Japanese rice grown in America, the difference in temperature between the morning and the evening is much bigger in Japan. And I think that makes a different quality rice than you would in, say, a place that's just hot all the time, like Arkansas or California or something. And so that we call it diurnal shift really is important in rice production. And a lot of times with American made sake, it tastes a little bit sour. And I believe that is because of the rice. So I am rooting for American sakes. I love them. One of my favorite breweries is called Proper Sake in Tennessee. If you're ever there, you should absolutely go. If you like today's sake, you should absolutely go. They make really great sake. And if you really like Daiginjo style sakes, like Chrissy, you should check out Islander in Hawaii, which makes really wonderful fruity Daiginjo style sakes.
Oh, have you tried the Kimoto from Brooklyn Kura?
I have, yeah. In fact,
What do you think of that?
Twice.
What do you think of it?
I think it's very much his style or interpretation of Kimoto. Brendan makes very nice sake. He's sort of a scientist by background. Actually, was a home brewer here in Portland. And he makes very clean sakes, and his Kimoto is very clean and very nice. Whereas if I'm leaning for Kimoto, I would probably lean more toward Proper Sake. But Brandon does a great job, no doubt about it.
I like it.
Yeah,
and I think it's
I will say
great value.
will kind of just good.
I was just saying it's also great value. I mean, I think the pricing is right for American Kimoto.
Yeah, for sure. His pricing's great. His quality's great. I mean, his sakes are very, very nice. And even I would say sort of the experimental stuff that he does, very, very good. Ken mentioned Den Sake in Oakland. He does a great job as well. He comes from a sommelier kind of wine background and does a really good job. Yoshi is his name, and he's just been really helpful to me. Like if I need to get a palette to, some of you got your calendars through Mommy Mart in Oakland, which is a wonderful, wonderful shop that has been doing it right for like 15 years, I think now. I sent the palette to Yoshi at Den, and then was able to get it over to Umami Mart. Yeah. Some of you, since you probably some of you are in East Bay as well. Fish and Bird is another great place to have good sake. Izakaya, woman-owned, women chef, really wonderful place. Great bar program, highly recommended.
Like Christy had pointed out, the Izumi up in Toronto, I think their stuff works better because all of their stuff is Canadian rice, which I think falls into what you're more talking about with the rice differential, Paul.
Interesting.
As opposed to the hot Arkansas sort of situation. It's more northern Canadian plains, like sitting above, I think it's like above like Michigan and like sort of the BC area. Like they've got a good sort of like that long day sort of growth period time.
Yeah. Oh, up above 50th parallel.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Very cool. Gene asked about what are you doing with your leftover calendar cups? They're all, throw them in the dishwasher. You can put candles in them if you want. I like to use them for picnic things. That's one of my favorite things to do if I'm going on a picnic, is to bring a bottle of sake and 2 cups, or as many cups as I have people. And then you can drink the cup first, and then you can open the bottle and then share the bottle around. And that's kind of fun. Some people had asked about, like, do you need to drink it all that night? I would say yes. There's not really a great way to recap them. Some of them come with a plastic cap that you could use. I've ripped most of those off because when my daughter and I were putting them all in the boxes, they'd sit too high if they had that cap on them. So I ripped most of them off. I'm just looking through the chat to see if there's any other questions. But if anyone else has any questions, just pipe up.
I know you want to keep it shelf stable, but do you think you ever might try to actually include Namazake in the calendar? I find it a lot brighter and sweeter and fruitier in general.
Totally. I mean, I am Namazake Paul, right? I mean, I love Namazake just like you. That's my favorite. I import about 48 different sakes, and 30 plus of them are Namazake or single pasteurized. So I love them. I would like to figure out a way to do it, but part of the problem is retailers just don't have the shelf stability, or the shelf, the refrigerator space, right? If I'm going to put together a box of something, like 10 boxes is already like 6 feet high, and I don't know where they're going to put them to keep them refrigerated. So I would recommend just buying them from a reputable person. I tried to put every day at the bottom on the left-hand side, I've got a sake to try if you like the one you just tried. So today, for example, the Tsuchida Hamare Koko, that's also Kimoto. That was the one in the presentation where I was doing this. I was making that sake. It is not a Nama, but it's really wonderful. The previous day, so Sase Iwai, the Futsushu, the one at the bottom is a Nama, the Ryoko dry, also from Niigata. really, really fun sake. The Afuri Night Mist, which is on day 2. That's also a Nama. That's a great one. That one is actually featured. If any of you are in New York, we are doing an event. I won't be there, but we're doing an event at a great shop called Karaichi. I think on the 9th, with all of the Afuri lineup. And you tried the Black Skull, of course. The Red Skull is a very similar. It's the same rice, it's the same yeast, the same brewer, obviously, except it's not polished as much. It's 70% versus 60%, and it has no brewer's alcohol added. So it's a Junmai as opposed to a Tokubetsu Hanjozo. So 70% polish. But interestingly, with less polishing, I feel like the Red Skull is more fruity. So search for that one online as well. Nice. Adrian's set favorite was day 2. Nice, excellent. I was going to check the polls here. What do we got? Can you guys see the poll? Day 1 was your favorite, and then we're mixed after that, huh? Cool. Well, that's good. At the end, I believe I did this. I did. I put a little survey at some point in there. And I'd love your feedback on what cups I should keep for next year or do differently. It's a lot of work putting together the calendar. It takes months of like putting them in the boxes and folding the lids and putting them in the thing, right? A lot of work. So I'm thinking about assembling it in Japan, but it's really interesting the way the laws work in Japan, because if the brewery wants to apply to be exempt from domestic taxes, then they have to deliver the sake to a bonded warehouse. So I can't assemble the calendar at a random warehouse, because the breweries then would have to pay domestic taxes on it, which they don't want to do. So what I think I'm going to have to try to do is either rent a space inside a bonded warehouse, which seems kind of crazy, or I'll have to do one brewery and then create the product and then ship it to the bonded warehouse to then ship it to me. So that's a possibility for next year, is to do a deep dive into one brewery, and then each year going on from now, we'll do one brewery. So anyway, any thoughts on that?
I really like the variety.
Mm.
So even if you could do an entire calendar of one brewery, which would be pretty impressive. Yeah, I think you'd lose something there.
Yeah, that's definitely, last year there was a lot of feedback around people really loving the variety of things.
Yeah,
being able to try different regions and prefectures and rices and breweries and all that.
I mean, you could do a versus. You could do like 2 breweries from the same region, like, and split them in half.
Yeah, I like that. That's fun. And then I could do a Junmai from one brewery, a Junmai from the other brewery, and a Ginjo and a Ginjo. That'd be fun. Figure out. There is a kind of a weird law where one brewery can buy from another brewery. I have to figure out if that's still like possible. Yeah.
So I put this in the chat knowing that it's just going to mean more work for you. But
Great.
now with the new licenses that are for export only.
Yeah.
Does that open up some new possibilities for you?
It does. Though I think there's some breweries that are going to be US market, but at least from my understanding, working with these breweries pretty closely, is that the US market is not as big as Asian markets, particularly Hong Kong, Singapore, and they're growing very quickly. particularly in Hong Kong and Singapore, and most of the export only products I think are going to go there. But I'm not. Thanks, Mark. But I'm not. But I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting thing. I don't envy Japanese businesses. It is a bureaucratic country with lots and lots of tax laws. And, I was talking to one brewery that they got denied for a travel subsidy of like $2,000 because they transposed a number in one of their tax forms. And it's just like, I wouldn't want to open a business in Japan. We'll put it that way. Nice.
Oh, you mind if I plug the Discord?
Yeah, please do. Throw a link in there.
So for any of you that don't know, we there's a Discord server full of tons of people who love sake. That is actually where I met Paul, and like right at the beginning of the pandemic, like really started getting into sake, right? Because when we couldn't go out to bars and stuff, like a lot of us were ordering back when Paul was a retailer. A lot of us would order from him and order some of the same stuff, and we every Thursday we still do this. We have a online drinking party, and we have sake and we talk about it, and it's a great time. And there's a bunch of us in there also that have the calendars. So if we have these events like once a week, but if during the rest of the days you want to talk about any of the sake that are in the calendar, we've got a bunch of us that have them. So it's cool to chat about that. Yeah, if anybody is also interested in homebrewing, whether you want to do it yourself or just want to learn more about it, we have also a big section on the Discord full of a bunch of really great experienced homebrewers, as well as like a bunch of American domestic commercial brewers are in there as well. So if you ever want to have your head explode from way too much technical knowledge about making sake, you can jump in there and take a look.
Nice. Thank you, Michael. Paula, you had mentioned that you were sharing and making your friends jealous, and I really appreciate that. So thank you. I do have a couple of about 100 calendars left. Last year I did 400 and sold out, and this year I've got about 100 left. So
are these all directly from your website? So I can
No, so I can't sell directly, is kind of the weird rules because I'm an importer and distributor. But if you go to Sec Wines, he can ship them to you.
Could you drop the link in the chat so I can share it? Yeah, somebody quote tweeted like, "Oh my God, sake advent calendar on Blue Sky," and they have like 9,000 followers, and I was like, "Uh-oh, I feel like this is a prime point where I should be, sending money your way."
Nice. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yes. And David, you're welcome to come to Portland anytime to drink all of my sake. All of you are. But the only loss will be the box tops, because I'm gonna do new artwork next year. The foams I can reuse next year, the shipping boxes I can reuse, and the cups, I'm just going to style out some retailers and have like a massive wall of cups at some of the local Portland retailers, which would be really fun.
Well, I will say that the structural integrity of the box has definitely improved since the 2 years ago, the first time you did it.
Yeah, I learned a lot that first year. There were a lot of broken cups and things in that first year. But yeah, I mean, it's maybe even overkill because there was only one that broke of 500 that I shipped. Or something like that. So pretty crazy that there's only one breakage.
I will say that having them all in the same order is probably the better way to do it. But it was very fun that first year, like not having any idea what was gonna be in it, and everybody getting something different every day. It
Yeah.
That was kind of fun. Maybe you should have an option to like for us sickos that want to randomize it to do that.
Yeah, I mean, you could just you can grab a random day if you want. Sure.
I got 3 Bambi cups and 3 of the Akiskas, which is one of my favorites, so I wasn't complaining.
Nice. I may have known that. So last year I put them all like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and everybody got the same one at the same day because I did a booklet. And then I got lots of feedback that no, that's not traditional. We got to have a random ordering of the numbers. Still, everybody gets the same thing every day. And then I doubled the size of this book. So that gave me a lot more room to put more information here about the brewery and pairings and stuff like that. So, and then people didn't like the script, so we changed that up as well. So lots of feedback last year, which really helped improve the quality of the book. Yeah, thank you, Nick. Appreciate the big book. Yeah, it's fun. As I say, I've got a couple extra books too. So if you need one, send me an email and I can pop one in the mail for you. And that website I linked to, Sec Wines, they've got all the ones that I recommend at the bottom. They've got all those available too. So I would mark your favorites, and then at the end of the calendar, clearly you don't need more sake this month, but in January you can place an order and order some more sake. Cool. Other questions? Fun. I really appreciate all of you being very experimental with these. I mean, the fun part about sake is doing that experimentation. And I very specifically tried to do very different styles the first week so that you can get a really wide variation. A couple of times later, we're going to have 2 of the same brewery back to back. So then you'll get a sense for what is the brewery style with 2 different sakes. And so that's kind of fun to be able to do that. So the breweries tend to have a house style. As we talked about a little bit earlier, there's just a very specific, or there's so many different levers that they're doing to develop the flavors. And so there'll be some commonalities along their sakes and their styles.
Oh, how many of them did you specifically import that weren't already being imported?
1, 2, 3. At least 8. So there's 3 from Takeda. We have another one from Sase UI coming later, which is very different than the Futsushu that you had. And the big bottle in the middle is a direct import as well. And maybe a couple other things.
Okay, cause I think that also might be a big improvement over the previous years, because like
definitely
1 cups that were previously being imported tend to be concentrated in a couple different styles. So
totally. And 3 years ago, it was so hard to get anything that wasn't just dry Hanjozo.
Yeah.
It's like typical cup sake is for like drinking at the stadium or on the train on the way home from work. And they tend to fall in this very clear style that is dry and pretty like simple. And so I really tried hard to get out of that style. I mean, there's just very few, even Ginjo, much less Daiginjo, in cups. I brought in one that I probably can't sell because it would be like at retail a $25 cup. And I just don't know if a $25.
Oh yeah, I think you were talking about that one before, yeah.
So, but you'll tell me.
Yeah, I don't know if even I would buy a $25 cup.
Yeah.
That'd be a bit much.
Yeah, there you go. Cool. Excellent. Well, thank you. Do hop on the Discord, on the Facebook if you're on either of those things. Pop in a picture of your calendar and your pets, and I'd love to see them all. Great. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.